I do appreciate so much the opportunity to be here this evening. As Nathan, wherever he is, there he is. As Nathan already told you, and I love this. I really do love this about the church. No matter where you go, there's a really good chance you're going to find either somebody you know or somebody that knows somebody that you know. You're going to make a connection with somebody. I met Nathan 15, 20 minutes ago and found out that my in-laws are some of his best friends in the world, and I love things like that. I love getting to make those kind of connections, and I think that's a very special, a very unique thing that we have in the church that other people can't replicate, and I think that's a wonderful thing. It's such a blessing that God has given us. One of the things I've noticed, as Nathan also pointed out, I'm a teacher, I'm a coach. We're expert movers, I'll put it that way. My wife and I have been married 6 years, and we have moved a lot. But the great thing is, everywhere we go, we automatically, whatever town we went to, we had a family as soon as we set foot there, and that's a wonderful thing, such a blessing. Being here tonight is a blessing. I appreciate the opportunity. My understanding is I'm supposed to talk about putting others first, and if I'm not supposed to talk about that, I'm talking about that tonight anyway, because that's what I'm prepared for. So hopefully that's correct. My understanding of all this is either A, every other option whatsoever for somebody to come speak tonight was completely full. They were busy, they were sick, something, and so I was the only option that was left. Or somehow or other word got out, and they said, we want the absolute worst person that could possibly talk about being selfless and putting others first. We want that guy to come talk to us. So not sure which one of those two it was. There's also, at Bullard tonight, we're having a homemade ice cream supper. And so I'm not certain there wasn't some conspiracy afoot to get me out of town so they could have more ice cream to eat. So I'm not sure which of those three options it is, but whatever it is, I'm very glad to be here with you tonight. Friday night in Texas in the fall, we all know what that means. That means high school football. Of course, for me as a football coach, I love that. I love that feeling. I love the glow of the lights, the sound of the band, the smell of the grass, or nowadays the smell of the rubber beads on the turf. I love that. There's a story I want to tell you tonight as we start our time together about a young man named John McClamrock. John McClamrock started out his Friday night like so many other young boys all across the state of Texas have started many Friday nights before, lining up to play a football game. Fans had just taken their seats as Dallas Hillcrest is facing off against Dallas Spruce. Bands are playing. Cheerleaders are tumbling down the track. The kicker comes up. He places the ball on the tee, lines up. He approaches it. He kicks that ball into the air. And the game is on. John McClamrock played for Dallas Hillcrest. He was on their kickoff team. The ball's kicked. He goes sprinting down the field full speed. Has his eyes on the ball carrier. He's going to go make a tackle and start this game off well for his team. He breaks through the blocking wedge. This is back in the day when those things were still legal. He breaks through the blocking wedge, has the return man in his sights. He lowers his head to make the tackle. And his head immediately collided with the thigh of the return man. One of John's teammates described it later. He said the sound was like a tree trunk breaking in half. John's head snapped back. He fell face first to the ground. John McClamrock would never walk again. For the next 34 years of his life, John would have no movement below his neck. Now that morning, October 17th of 1973, it started out just like every other morning had for John. He bounded out of bed. He threw on his bell-bottom jeans that I'm sure some of y'all probably wore at some time or another. He put on that loud patterned shirt with the oversized collar that some of y'all probably know about as well. He got into his red El Camino with a vinyl roof, and he headed off to school that morning. John was 17 years old. He was the quintessential, the prototypical all-American boy. One girl who had dated him at one point in high school described him as being just heartbreakingly beautiful. Many of the girls from Hillcrest High School would go after school to the local Tom Thumb grocery store where John worked. And they would buy numerous watermelons just so John would have to carry out the watermelons to their car for them. As John got up that morning, of course, his mind was on the football game that was to be played that night. As he parked his car at the school that morning, he had no idea that would be the last time he would ever drive that red El Camino. He had no idea that night would be the last time he suited up for a football game. The story that began that night and that unfolded over the next 34 years is a story about the love and the devotion of a mother. John was 17 years old. Anne McClamrock was 54. She was described by many as a striking woman, green eyes, strawberry blonde hair. That night after John's accident on the field, at the hospital, she was informed that John might not survive even through the night. But he did. In the late spring of 1974, after therapy, after many attempts at rehabilitation, Anne and Mac McClamrock, his father, brought John home to a very modest one-story home they had in Preston Hollow. Every morning before the sun would come up, Anne would get out of bed, she'd put on her makeup, she would do her hair. She would put on a nice dress or pantsuit, depending on the day, dab some perfume on her neck, and she would go into her son John's room. And there she would shave him. She would clip his nails. She'd brush his teeth. She'd give him a sponge bath. She would shampoo his hair. She would scratch his nose when it itched. She fed him all of his meals, serving him one bite after another until he was finished. She changed his catheter. She emptied his drainage bag when it was full. She routinely would go and turn him throughout the day so that bed sores would not develop. From Monday through Saturday, she never left the house. She was John's constant companion, John's constant caretaker. On Sunday mornings, she would get up and she would go to church. When she left services, she would go to the Tom Thumb grocery store where John had worked, and she'd buy groceries. Once a month, she would go to the hair salon at the J.C. Penney store and treat herself to a perm. Outside of those few small moments, every other moment of her life was devoted to John. By 1995, Anne was in her late 70s. She was still maintaining her daily schedule of care for John. Several years before, she read an article that exercise was important to prolonging your life. Exercise is important to having a healthy heart, to promoting longevity. And so she ordered a cheap stationary bicycle from a catalog, and she put the stationary bike in her bedroom. Every night before she went to bed, she would go climb on that bike. She would ride that bike. When time permitted, wearing ancient, worn-out, cracked tennis shoes, she would take quick walks around the block. But Anne knew that time was catching up with her. And so at night, as she would pray before she went to bed, she began to add a single sentence on the end of her nightly prayers. She would ask God to please God, let me live one day longer than John. Just one day is all I need. You see, her goal, her desire was that she and she alone would always be the one to take care of her son. So she continued to pray that prayer, and John continued to hang on. January 12th of 2001, Anne celebrated her 82nd birthday. John's younger brother Henry brought home some chicken enchiladas from El Phoenix. He brought Anne a bag of red licorice, which was her absolute favorite candy. And he bought her some perfume. 5 years later, on her 87th birthday, they repeated that tradition yet again. But now at 87, it was very obvious that Anne was slowing down considerably. Instead of getting up before the sun came up and getting dressed immediately, she would oftentimes spend her morning in her nightgown and her favorite green terry cloth bathrobe. She was having a hard time hearing. Her eyesight was weakening. She began to wobble as she would walk around the house and even had fallen a time or two. In the fall of 2007, she fell and she broke a bone in her right shoulder. It was only then, some 30 plus years later, that she began to allow her younger son, Henry, to take over, turning John over in bed from time to time. In January of 2008, they celebrated Ann's 89th birthday. There were some more enchiladas from El Phoenix. There was another bag of red licorice. In late February of that same year, John was taken to Presbyterian Hospital with bed sores that just would not go away. They would not heal. He developed a fever. He developed pneumonia. After 35 years, his body was tired. His body was wearing out. He asked his brother Henry to bring their mom to see him one day. And John told Henry, he said, have her look pretty. She would like for him to see her that way. Henry looked at his older brother and he asked him simply, John, are you giving up? There was a long, long silence. A food cart rattled down the hallway. The nurse's sneakers could be heard squeaking outside. And as all the other sounds that we know of so well in a hospital came through the room, after quite some time, John finally said, Henry, I know about her prayer. I need to go so that she can go. On March 18, 2008, Henry drove Ann to JCPenney to have her hair done. And then he took her to the rehab facility to see John. And of course, being an old pro at this, even though she's 89 years old, she walks in, she immediately begins to check the dressings on his wounds. She checks his catheter. She goes over, she places her hand gently on John's head and begins to smooth the hair along his temples. She touched his forehead. She slowly ran her hand down one side of his face, past his cheekbones and the curl of his hair. And John then told his mother something he never said in the 35 years she had been caring for him. He said, Mom, I know how hard it's been for you. She said, Johnny, it hasn't been hard. It's been an honor. Henry took her home, helped Ann into bed, and she went to sleep. 30 minutes after they left, John had closed his eyes and quietly passed from this life. 8 weeks later, Ann died in her bed. Her son Henry sitting beside her, holding her hand. Her prayer that she had prayed all those years had been answered. She'd lived to care for her son. Now, I tell you that story very simply tonight to give you a crystal clear picture of what selflessness looks like. To give you a vivid picture of what it truly looks like to put others first. If you want to see selflessness in action, you want to see a textbook definition of selflessness, look at a mom. There is no greater demonstration of selflessness than a mother. I see it daily with my wife as she cares for both of our boys. The love, the selflessness that she has is day after day. She continually, not just them, puts all three of us ahead of her wants and her needs and her wishes. If you're a parent, you undoubtedly have a very different perspective on love than you ever had before you became a parent. Some of y'all may have seen my son Mason. He's turned 4 years old in about a week and a half. my understanding, my grasp of what love truly is vastly different today than it was 4 years ago. I can say that without a shadow of a doubt. And I don't mean to say it's just moms that love their kids. Dads love their kids too. At least I sure love mine. We think about that. We think about the idea of selflessness. We think of the idea of putting others first. I think we really have to stop and understand, stop and look at this even from the viewpoint of a parent and the love of a parent. November 19th of 2020, up to this point in what has been 35 years of my life on this earth, November 19th, 2020, hands down, without a doubt, the worst day of my life. Our youngest son, Hudson, was about 5 weeks old. Hadn't slept well that night. He wasn't feeling well. I'd already, about 3 o'clock that morning, I'd sent an email to my principal, hey, I'm not coming in today. I've got to stay home with my oldest son. My youngest one's going to the doctor, what have you. So I'd already taken the day off. We're already making arrangements for Hudson to go get checked out because just something here isn't right. And if you're a parent, you know that feeling. Just something's not right with my kid, and I want to know what it is. My wife's getting ready to take him to the doctor because she doesn't trust me to remember all the things the doctor tells us and all that kind of good stuff. So she's getting ready to take Hudson to the doctor. I'm walking around holding him, trying to placate him, trying to soothe this crying, screaming little bundle of joy. As I'm holding him, he starts shaking a little bit. His eyes start rolling back and dancing in his head a little bit. And this kind of thick, frothy spit starts forming in his mouth. Now, I've never in my life seen someone have a seizure. But if I were envisioning what it would look like when a 5-week-old baby has a seizure, this is what it would look like. Found out later that's exactly what's happening. I'm holding my 5-week-old son as he has a seizure in my arms. My wife takes him to hospitality ER there in Tyler. She calls me a couple of hours later, hey, we're getting an ambulance right now. They're taking him immediately to Dallas Children's. Okay, great. It's a great place to go. We're going to get some answers. Well, I've still got a 2.5-year-old kid here at home I've got to do something with now because I've got to get to Dallas. And so I start talking to people, making arrangements. My parents come over. It's about an hour-and-a-half drive for them. They come over to watch Mason. And so they come over, they're going to watch him and take him to their house for a few days. I'm trying to get stuff together. I've got to get clothes for Ryan. I don't know what Hudson might need. I don't know what I might need. I don't know if we're coming home tomorrow. I don't know if we're coming home 6 months from now. I know nothing that is going on. My parents leave with Mason. I throw bags in the car. I take off for Dallas. The two things I can tell you about that drive, Dallas never seemed farther away than it was then. It seemed like it took about 10 hours to make that trip. And I remember the entire way doing nothing but crying and praying. I'd only known Hudson for 5 weeks up to that point. Now, we hadn't established any great and wonderful bond, didn't know much about his personality, had no idea what interests, what similarities we're going to develop one day. I don't even know 5 weeks into it if he even really likes me. But I know that's my son. And I know the love that there already was just even after a few weeks, the love that there was immediately in my heart as soon as I held that little boy in my arms. I got to the hospital. He could only have one visitor at a time, so I went up there. My wife came downstairs. By the time I got there, they'd been there a few hours. He's already got tubes and wires and all this mess connected to him. The most pitiful looking thing you've ever seen in your life. 10 minutes after I get there, they come in and they hook all these wires up to his head, all these electrodes, whatever, they wrap him up. And once that first wire goes on, I can't pick him up. I can't hold him. All I can do is sit there and look at him. I can talk to him, I can pat his hand, and that's all I can do. And it broke my heart. I'll tell you right now, he's fine. Everything's good to go. He's at home tonight. Coincidentally, he is sick tonight. He's running a little bit of a fever, but he's good. But even now, almost 2 years after the fact, I tell you this story of my son hurting, knowing full well he's in my house right now, perfectly safe and sound. It still breaks my heart. It still hurts me down deep inside. In fact, some pictures of that popped up on our TV screen the other night. We had a slideshow of pictures going. And there immediately was just this pit in my stomach. Tears came to my eyes looking at my son suffering. And what that experience drilled into me even more so than what I'd already realized up to that point is what I would be willing to do to take care of my son. The lengths to which I would be willing to go to make sure my boys were safe and were healthy. As we sat through those first few days having no idea what was going on, doctors having no idea what the problem was, so they had no idea what the solution was. The one thing I absolutely knew is whatever, and I mean whatever I had to do to make sure my son was safe and was healthy, we were going to do it. I didn't care who we had to bribe, who we had to talk to, what terrible, awful things I might have to do. I had no qualms at that point about doing them. I was going to do whatever had to be done to take care of my son. The only priority I had in my life was making sure that Hudson was safe. Now, so far, this has been a terrible downer of a lesson. I apologize for that. We're not going to keep going this route, I promise. But I tell you all of this simply to tell you, simply to set the stage for us tonight. That's a long introduction, too, isn't it? Simply to set the stage for us tonight of what it truly means to put others first. Amma Clamrock's a great example. Most any mother's a tremendous example. But all of those examples even pale in comparison to the example of Jesus Christ. Turn, if you would, to Philippians chapter 2 with me. You might not have to turn there. You probably already know exactly where we're headed with this now. Philippians chapter 2, we're going to start reading there in verse 5 as we look at Jesus and this idea of putting others before yourself, putting others first. Jesus gives us a great example of this right here. Start in verse 5 of Philippians chapter 2. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Look at what the Apostle Paul is talking about there, what the Apostle Paul is writing about there. He writes of how Jesus emptied himself, Jesus humbled himself. You're talking about God. Jesus is divine. Jesus is deity. Jesus is sitting there in heaven with God. And he lowers himself. Paul says he goes from being God to taking on the form of a servant and becomes born in the likeness of men. He becomes a man. He becomes flesh and blood just like you and just like me. Now that right there is pretty substantial. That in and of itself is an humbling experience. It's a selfless act. But does it stop there? What does Paul say he does? Look there in verse 8 again of Philippians chapter 2. Being found in human form. So once he's taken on the likeness of men, once he looks like you and I, he humbles himself by becoming obedient to the point of death. And not just any death, Paul points out. He doesn't just become obedient to death. You know, he doesn't get just this very calm, peaceful passing from this life, sitting at home surrounded by friends and family. He doesn't just become obedient to the point of death. He becomes obedient, Paul says, to the point of death on the cross. The most horrific, the most painful, the most miserable death perhaps that has ever been devised by evil mankind. Crucifixion on a cross. Think of the selflessness that is involved in this, both on the part of God and on the part of Jesus. God the Father gives up his only begotten Son to save you and to save me. Now, I just told you all the things I didn't tell you all the things I'd be willing to do, but I told you my mindset of what I would be willing to do to save either one of my boys. I can think of nothing I would not be willing to do to save my two sons. I can think of no one, not even myself, not even my wife, that I would be willing to say, you know what, I'll let one of my sons die so that this individual can live. I wouldn't give up my sons to save anyone else's life. I wouldn't give up my sons to save the lives of everyone else on this earth. And that's very likely makes me a terrible, horrible, selfish person. I'm okay with that because I love my boys that much. There's nothing I would not do to protect them. There's nothing I would not do to keep them safe, to keep them alive. And yet God, our Heavenly Father, was so selfless in his love for you, his love for me, that as he sat on his throne in heaven, he looked down on this wonderful creation he had made, and he saw all of us, all the humans that lived then, all the humans that would come after, saw how horrible they are, how evil, how wicked, how flawed they are, and how flawed they would be. And he said, you know what? I love all of those flawed humans so much. I cannot bear that they would be separated from me for all eternity. And so because of his great love for us, a love that is so broad, a love that is so mighty, so wonderful, I cannot even begin to understand it. I cannot begin to fathom that love. He sent his Son into this world to save us from that death. So that you and I didn't have to go and spend all eternity in hell, but could instead spend all eternity in heaven with God. Jesus lowered himself. He became like you and me. He lowered himself to our level in order to save us. Probably my favorite passage in all the Scriptures in Romans chapter 5. Turn over there with me if you would as well. Romans chapter 5, starting in verse 6. As we see very clearly the fact that Jesus even comes to this world, we see the love of God for us. That the Father is willing to send his Son into this world for you and for me. We see the love of God very clearly there, but look at the love of Christ as well. Romans 5, starting in verse 6. For while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now think about that for a minute. Those three verses tell us very clearly what Jesus did and why he did it. Now, I'll freely tell you, if my wife were here, she'd be nodding along with this. I think I'm pretty wonderful. If you have any doubts about that, come talk to me after services. I'll have no problem telling you just how wonderful I really think I am. My mama thinks I'm wonderful too, from what she's told me over the years. I don't know if anybody else does, but I do and my mama does. I can never be wonderful enough. I can never be good enough. I can never be righteous enough to deserve Jesus Christ dying for me. And here's the dirty little secret, folks. It's not just me. You can't do it either. No matter how wonderful you might think you are, you're not wonderful enough that Jesus Christ deserves to lay down his life for you. And you never will be. But when we talk about this idea of selflessness, this idea of putting others first, that's a textbook example right there. Jesus Christ came to this earth. He humbled himself. He took on the form of man. He went to the cross and died, Not because we were righteous and deserved it, not because of how wonderful and holy we are. He did all of that even though the last thing on this earth that we ever deserved was salvation from our sins. No matter how many times you talk to me, no matter how many times you have me, you listen to me. The one thing I guarantee you will never hear me say is, I want what I deserve. Because I promise you, I don't want that. I do not want what I deserve, and I'm betting if you really stop and think about it, you don't want that either. Because what we deserve is separation from God. What we deserve is death. What we deserve is eternal punishment. And yet what Jesus does is he comes to this earth. He knows from the get-go, he knows from the very beginning what his mission is, and it's to die. And he does that because he loves us. He does that because he knows there is no other way whatsoever to save us from our sins than that he come to this world and lay down his life. There's a story that's told, I don't know for sure if it's true, but it's a great story, so I'm going to tell it again anyway. Of a brother and sister. The sister is a little bit older. She's about 11 or 12 years old. She's very sick. She needs a blood transfusion to live. And the doctors have looked high and low, searched everywhere they can to try and find a donor for this girl. They cannot find one. She's got a little brother about 8 years old. Their blood is the same blood type. He is a perfect match for her. And the little boy's parents go and talk to him. A doctor comes and talks to the little boy. And they explain to him that his sister is dying. His sister is going to die unless she gets his blood, and that's going to help save her life. And would he be willing to give up his blood to save his sister? And the little boy sits there in silence for a couple of minutes. And he finally says, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it for her. And everybody's so thrilled, so excited. They go and they prep the little boy. They put all the needles and whatnot in his arm and hook his sister up. And the little boy's sitting there holding his mother's hand. And he says, Mom, is it going to hurt when I die? So, well, son, what are you talking about? He said, well, aren't they going to take all of my blood and give it to my sister? And of course, Mom explained what's going on here and all that, but that little boy in his mind, he was going to let them take every last drop of blood he had out of his body so that his sister could live. Now he's scared. He's worried about what's going to happen to him. Is this going to hurt? Is this going to be painful? Am I going to suffer in all of this? But he says, I'm going to do it because I want my sister to live. Think about that for a minute. Think about the kind of love that says, you know what? I don't want to do this. This is going to hurt. I'm going to suffer. This is going to be painful. But I love this person so much that I'm going to do it anyway. I love this person so much that I would give my life to save them. That's a powerful love, isn't it? Now let's go a step farther with that love right there. Would you be willing to do that for someone that hated you? For someone that despised you? For somebody that rejected everything you believed and everything you stood for? Now if you say you would, you're a far better person than I am. I'll freely admit that to you tonight. And I'm going to question your truthfulness. I'm going to tell you that right now too. It's one thing to die for somebody we loved, to die for a sibling, to die for a child. It's another to die for someone that hates us. And yet that is what Jesus Christ did. For a world that had turned its back on God, a world that was full of sin, a world that was lacking completely in righteousness. The text tells us there, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He died for us not because we deserved it. He died for us in spite of the fact that we can never deserve it. Think about the kind of selflessness that says, I'm going to suffer so that someone that hates me can live. How much time do I have? Because I can go for another couple of hours. When am I supposed to wrap up? 5 minutes. Whew. All right, we're going to have to hurry. I don't do much fast, so I'm going to have to do this fast now. That's what Jesus did for us. Go look at Jesus' prayer in the garden the night before he's crucified. He doesn't want to go to the cross. He prays over and over and over again 3 separate times. He says, Father, let this cup pass from me. Find another way, Father. Don't make me go to the cross. But then he says, not my will, but yours be done. He fervently prays that that cross could be taken away from him, that he does not have to go to Golgotha's hill. But he went. He let those Roman soldiers pound those spikes in his hands. He let them post that cross up on Golgotha's hill. And make no mistake about it, he did not have to be there. Jesus Christ did not have to be on that cross. Nails did not hold him to that cross. Love is what held Jesus to that cross. At any point in time, had he wanted to, legions of angels could have come down from heaven. Jesus Christ could have come down off of that cross, walked off Golgotha's hill, and Rome and every one of her legionnaires could have not done one single thing about it except watch it happen. And none of that happened. Because he loved us that much. Now this is all well and good up to this point. But anytime we get together, anytime we study God's Word, I think we're remiss if we don't ultimately put a nice, neat bow on it and figure out, okay, so what? Why does this matter? How does this apply to me? How do I use this in my daily life? The Apostle Paul said in Ephesians 5 and chapter 1, he said, be imitators of God. He writes to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, he said, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. If you and I are going to be faithful to the gospel message, if we are going to be faithful to the title of Christian, we must be selfless people. Now that's going to look very different for each one of us based on our skills, our interests, our circumstances in life, the abilities we have. But the underlying theme in all of this is that you and I, as followers of Christ, should be constantly, continually looking for ways, looking for opportunities to serve others. I want you to think about this for just a moment. Picture in your mind someone, a medical professional, a doctor comes to you and says, I've got very terrible news for you. You have 24 hours left to live. That's it. This time tomorrow, done, over. What are you going to do? The last 24 hours you have on this earth, what are you going to do with that? Is there somebody you really want to go see you hadn't seen in a while? Maybe you're like me, you can tell I like to eat. Maybe there's a particular meal you want, that last meal. Maybe there's a restaurant you want to go to just one last time. Maybe you want to spend time with your friends, your family. I'm certain you just immediately thought of, I want to do this and this and this and this. What were all of those things you were focusing on, centered around? I'd be willing to bet for every last one of us they were centered around ourselves, around our own personal wants and wishes and desires. You know, look at Jesus. He's headed to the cross. He knows it's coming. He knows he's just not even a full 24 hours away from the cross. He sits down to eat the Passover meal with his disciples, institutes what we know today as the Lord's Supper. We know his spirit's troubled, his heart is grieved over what he knows he's going to endure. And what does Jesus do? He kneels down at the feet of his disciples and he washes their feet. Some of the disciples were jealous and said, no, Master, you should not be washing our feet. Jesus says, I'm the master. You call me master, you call me teacher. If I can wash your feet as the master, if I can wash your feet as the teacher, you can do that too. Now, I'm not advocating for foot washing. I don't think foot washing is the point here. Service and servanthood is the point. Jesus Christ, before he goes to the cross, can find ways to serve. You and I absolutely can do it as well. Jesus says, Matthew chapter 5, we're the salt of the earth, the light of the world. I don't know how recently you've paid attention to anything that goes on in the world. The world is a dark place. I promise I'm wrapping up right now. The world is a dark place. If you do not believe that, before you go to bed tonight, just flip on the news for 5 minutes. The world is full of evil. The world is full of wickedness. The world is full of sin. The only way to get rid of darkness, you can't take darkness away. It has negative quality. You can't take darkness from something. It's just there. The only way you get rid of darkness is by flipping the lights on, by shining a light. I think hopefully you can figure out where I'm headed with this right now. You walk out those doors tonight, you're going to go out into a world that's dark. I don't know what your next church tonight. Maybe you're going to go out to eat. Maybe you're going to go to the grocery store. Maybe you're going to go home, go to work in the morning. I don't know. But you're going to go to a place that's full of darkness, full of evil. If we're truly going to be selfless people, truly put others first, truly serve others, that starts by shining our light. Because that's what Jesus talks about. We're supposed to shine our light so that God is glorified, so that others are going to see our good works and glorify God in heaven. That's what he calls us to do. That's the whole idea of servanthood. We're shining our lights, not because we want people to look at us and say, oh man, look at all the great things that fella's doing over there. No. We're shining our lights because we want that light to point people to the Master. Because we want that light we're shining to cause others to give glory and honor and praise to God. What we have to realize is being a Christian isn't about me. It's about others. It's about loving others. It's about serving others. And ultimately, when it's all said and done, it's about guiding others to the peace, to the safety, to the security that is found only in Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for your time and your attention this evening. Thank you so very much for allowing me this opportunity to be here. And I hope that at some point I'll get to come back and do this all over with you again. Thank you so very much.